Okay. Um, After I get back from this expedition, the 2015 Wildlife expedition, I'm going to be home in Texas about a week, and then I'm going to go to Alberta, Canada, and go to a farewell event for Mike Boon, who I caved with pretty much 2 years in a row. I think the only times I ever went caving with him were those 2 years, 1976 and 1977, at Sumidero Yochib in Chiapas, Mexico. Um, it had already been partially explored by Canadian cavers, and Jim Smith, who's here in this expedition, and I and others joined them in 1976, and then the following year put together the expedition to continue in the cave, and Boone came along. Um, I'm going to tell some stories about Boone at this farewell, some funny stories, and one that I'll tell is about him saving my life in that cave during a big flood, a flash flood, um, where we estimated the water flow of the cave went from 40 cubic feet a second to 400 cubic feet a second in a matter of minutes. Um, and we had to make some quick decisions. And Boone and I made the decision that one of us would get to the wall with a rope, and he instantly volunteered to do it. So I made a loop, tied a loop, stood in the loop as the current was beginning to bump me off of the rock in the middle of the stream in the cave as the water was rising, and he did an incredible feat of swimming to the wall in a very fast current, swept downstream, but he caught an eddy current against the wall and made it, and just in time. The other two guys, Gary Napper was one of those other two, and he's here cooking on this expedition. We've been friends a very long time. He and Blake Harrison, who's going to go to this farewell event with me, um, crossed that rope, and I continued to be the anchor. Um, and by the time I got off of it, the water was over waist deep and pushing me off of the boulder. There was a 75-foot high waterfall very close to us downstream, so would have perished had I gone over it, but didn't. And once those two guys were over, or following Boone, then I let the current have me, and I was swept off of the boulder. Um, Holding on, I'd gotten out of the loop, of course, and made it over there, and we were saved. So I wrote a book about Sumidero Yochib. The title of it's Yochib, the River Cave, and in the acknowledgments I credited Mike Boone with saving my life there. So I owe it to him to go to this event. And we were friends, and caved one-on-one together in some real intense caving. Another story I'll tell about him, it was kind of funny, I thought, was when we reached the sump in Yochib, big beautiful sump, and I found a canteen of water that I recognized. It was my canteen from the year before. It had been bobbing in the sump for a year. And when Boone reached the sump, he dropped his wetsuit and shit into it. And we were really pretty surprised because we were, real proud of ourselves to reach that point, and that was his statement. And when I submitted the manuscript to the publisher, the editor said, "This is not going to get published unless he writes a letter saying that's exactly what happened." So I wrote Mike and told him that, and he wrote a letter and said, "That's exactly what happened." He was proud of it. I thought it was pretty funny. And he came here. In fact, the picture that is in my Yochib book of Mike was taken here at San Agustin, right here within sight of one of the main entrances of Sistema Huautla. And he didn't go caving with us. He was actually chasing a woman here that was on the expedition. And I don't think that worked out for him, but he was giving it his best try. And I did get a really good photograph of him, which I think will be in maybe the Canadian Caver with a good article about his exploits. But he did cave here. And in 1968, 67, he caved here in Huautla and was one of the lead guys exploring down in Sótano de San Agustin, down to the 600 meters in depth that the Canadians reached that year. Talking about our project here, which we call Proyecto Espeleológico Sistema Huautla, our caving, my friends and I, began caving here in the mid-70s. There was a hiatus of caving here between 1970 and 76 because some American hippies had abused the area and taken up residence here and got kind of wild and crazy with eating psychedelic mushrooms. So that was probably a good thing because those of us that started coming to Watla in 1976 sort of honed our skills and became pretty good at caving in wet caves and wearing wetsuits and so forth, so we could handle what the lower portions of Sistema Huautla are like, you know, with a lot of water. And so I was pretty regular caving here from 1977. I didn't end up making it that initial trip at Christmas time in 1976. Came very close to coming, but just personal matters kept me from it. So Bill Stone and Jim Smith, who's here now, and others came down just to check and see if maybe there was more to explore, and found the Upper Gorge on that trip. So we realized there's probably a lot more here to explore. So we did 3 expeditions in 1977. I was on all 3 of them. And then we were rolling with momentum, and we pretty much had annual expeditions for the next 17 years through 1994. And the 1994 expedition was a big one, and that's when Sump 9 was reached. And after that, it was sort of like, there's other places to go. And even though we knew there was a lot of potential here, and there's surely more entrances that connect to this system, there was other places to go. So I went to a whole lot of other places in the United States and Mexico and even China a couple of times. Caved with some British cavers there, Colin Duncan and Matt, what's his last name? I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, in those fantastic caves in China. But when Chris Jewell contacted me, I believe in 2011, about going to Sump 9, I was very encouraging and said, great, please do, and supplied him with answers to any questions he asked, logistically, down to where to fly to, what rope lengths, who to rent from. I even suggested that I highly recommended that he get Ernie Garza to come along, which he did do, not only as an interpreter, but somebody that the people in the village of San Agustin are familiar with, because that probably helped in renting houses and just moving right in. And in exchange for the information and the contacts that I supplied Chris with, I asked him if a couple of us could join in and come in the last couple of weeks. And the main thing was to just be here, especially if they were successful at reestablishing Sistema Huautla as the deepest cave in the Western Hemisphere, which they did. It was only 9 meters short of the depth of Sistema Cheve. And also to check out a lead that Tommy and I had in mind for years down the original route in San Agustin. And we found about half a kilometer of good cave. And as Tommy and I were leaving that expedition, we went back to Oaxaca. And we're going to fly back on separate flights back to the United States. We sat there in the restaurant at the airport and talked about how much we like this place and how much there is to do. And we're not getting any younger, both being in our 60s. And if we're going to hand it over to younger people, maybe this is the time to bring them here and show them the ropes, so to speak, how to come in here and have an expedition and try to get momentum going again. So we sat there and literally, like is a proverbial thing to do, we made notes on a napkin and we made some objectives, and they were to have an annual expedition for the month of April for 10 years in a row and extend the length of the cave from the then 62 kilometers to 100 kilometers. Why that number? Well, it's a nice round number and 3 digits instead of 2, and we think it's here. If you look at the list of the world's longest caves, deepest caves, list of the world's deepest caves, Huautla, as they stand now, is the longest of the 16 deepest caves in the world. It's the 8th deepest cave in the world, given what Chris Jewell's British expedition added, that 80 meters of depth in 2013. Um, but we're pretty sure that there's a lot of length that could be added, and we stated a goal of extending the depth to 1,610 meters, which isn't that much more than 1,545. But you'd probably have to add a higher entrance to do that. This is a challenge here because of the way the locals are on the high ground, on the north end of the system. And we've really taken the diplomacy on straight on 2 years in a row now, and we haven't gotten anywhere with it yet. I think in the end we will, in the long run. And then we put a display up in the Presidencia, the government building this year, which is meant to educate the local people through time that what's in the caves are not spirits, or if there are, they're good spirits, not malevolent spirits. And mostly there's just great sights to be seen, and our purpose to come here is to just do the original exploration and report on what we found, so that people know what's really in these caves, and it's not a big mystery on into the future. So this is the second expedition, and of hopefully 10, and I'll definitely say that Chris Jewell and that expedition inspired us to return. That was good, and I thanked him for that. They were really bold in what they did, and they were real successful, and it got us to want to come back, and here we are. Next year, already thinking about next year. It really depends on what we find this year. We're only halfway through this expedition. We said month-long expeditions, but last year we realized you can't just show up here and start caving that day, because you got houses to rent, local people to appease, and government people to visit with, and so on. So some of us got here about a week and a half before the real numbers arrived to begin rigging the caves. And that was a good idea, I think. So some of us are here a total of almost 6 weeks. And we're yet to make any big discoveries this year. Already made some minor ones with biological collections, and we got a Mexican paleontologist coming to see a site that we found last year, which all indications are is pretty notable. Some Pleistocene animal remains, and that's just what's on the surface of a talus cone beneath a now non-existent entrance. But there used to be a natural trap there, it appears. And then we've got people camping deep underground, 700 meters deep at Camp 3, where Chris Jewell and the British camped. That was a multinational group, but British led in 2013, camping in the same place and exploring upstream toward the northernmost entrances. And then we got people in a cave named La Grieta, which is an entrance to Sistema Huautla. There's 2 entrances there. Sistema Huautla's got 20 entrances, and 2 of those are La Grieta's entrances, and they're camping deep. We're about to go in again tomorrow and camp deep there, and are also pushing to the north, where the highest entrances would be. So if we don't get permission from the Mazatec Indians on the surface, then we'll just come up under their feet and explore the caves beneath their lands without them knowing it. What else?
That's good.
Okay.
Thank you. Yep.